Welcome back, everyone. We are now down to our last panel of the conference. It seems it's gone very quickly, but it's been such a fantastic 2 days, and what a way to end it with our last panel of Knowing Your Rights. So I hope everyone tuning in, whether that's just today or yesterday, has enjoyed all our discussion so far. And as I've previously mentioned, hopefully we will all be back in a room together to discuss these important topics. Right, let's now turn to our panel today, which is going to be discussing how construction clients can be supported by the financial burdens that COVID-19 has imposed on many firms over the past 6 months, and is obviously continuing to do so today. So joining us on the of Knowing Your Rights is the head of the Middle East region for Reed Smith, Sachin Kera, HKA's partner Haroon Niazi, and Pinson Mason's head of risk advisory services for the Middle East, Mark Raymond. Gentlemen, thanks very much for agreeing to take part in our discussion today. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks very much, Ashley.
Thanks, Ashley.
No problem at all. And as I did previously, I want to give a brief summary each of our panelists, just out of the consideration of our viewers tuning in. So Sachin Kera has a significant amount of experience in advising government and the private sector on privatising publicly procured infrastructure and development works, particularly across the Middle East and India. Haroon Niazi has more than 10 years experience in the construction industry and has instructed on matters ranging from domestic construction disputes and commercial claims through to acting as a part of an arbitration team in multi-billion-dollar arbitration proceedings. And finally, Mark Raymond joined Pinson Masons in 1999 and has advised on complex, large-scale technical, commercial and legal disputes for clients in the infrastructure, energy, oil and gas and construction sector. Now that I've given the introductions, let's begin our final discussion of the day. So, gentlemen, for many, this year has been a struggle for most construction stakeholders. If you were tuning in to the last panel, I kind of made this quite clear. So I just want to come to each of you on how each of your companies has supported your clients to make sure that they're able to perform their contractual obligations since the start of COVID-19. Perhaps we could start with you, Haroon. How have you supported your clients, obviously, during these difficult times?
Thanks, Ashley. It's good to be the last panel. Looks like you saved the best till last.
I was going to say that, but I thought maybe not.
Okay, I said it for you. I mean, the last 3 or 4 months have been incredibly challenging for every business, for us and our clients. How have we helped our clients? I would say we've remained agile. We've listened to our clients and we've listened to their needs along the way. When the pandemic, let's say, kicked in March, April, we saw uncertainty from our clients. Our clients perhaps didn't know how to respond, particularly those who are in the delivery phase of live construction projects. And that was our moment to help our clients, to be agile in their moment of need and help them to find solutions to the problems that they started to encounter in the delivery of complex construction projects in the Middle East.
Okay. And Mark, we'll come to you next. What's some of the strategies that you've kind of adopted at Pinson Masons during these times, and how have you sort of particularly helped your clients and stakeholders during obviously the start of the pandemic?
Well, thanks very much, Ashley. I guess the mantra has very much been cash is king, as it always is in the construction sector. But particularly now, and as Haroon said, over the last 4 or 5 months, what we've seen is clients coming to us and asking us, what can we do to preserve our cash flow, to preserve our rights, and to look to making sure that our projects are running efficiently, how we can deal with the pressure on our supply chain, and all the issues that go around that. So I guess it's really more, you know, a lot of it's very much common sense. Because cash is so important at the moment, looking at what your contractual obligations are, both in relation to cash payments, cash recovery, issues around that, and providing clear, pragmatic advice as to you know, particularly where there's a number of different options, about how the client can make sure that they're preserving their entitlements, that they're not unnecessarily losing money or giving up claims and giving up rights. So I think that's been the main, you know, that's been the main thrust over the last few months, coming up with creative ways of dealing with the fallout from, you know, government measures introduced to combat the pandemic. So the limitations that was being imposed on building sites and social distancing and, you know, the movement of labour, etc., etc. So it was really just analysing what was available, and as I said, giving clear and pragmatic advice as to how best to protect their position.
Okay. And Sachin, you obviously part of our dispute resolution conference earlier this year, so a lot of these questions are probably going to be similar to what I asked you previously. But you know, what Mark just said then, that cash is king, that's kind of one of the well-known statements that continually crops up. So what it'd be good just to get your views about what Haroon and Mark have just said. Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? Is there something different that you do at Reed Smith?
Well, thanks, Ashley. Look, I very much agree with both Mark and Haroon. I think we were fortunate that the construction industry was less affected than others, in the fact that it was allowed to continue in most shape and form, unlike airlines or retail and F&B, etc. So in that regard, we were fortunate. But I do agree with Mark. It's very much as a cash is king scenario. And I think in terms of what we have done, I think a really important thing is you've got to show as much empathy as possible for your clients and your relationships. And I think Mark is right. A lot of sort of legal risk assessments having to be done in relation to contractual arrangements and being proactive in the management of those situations. I think clients have been willing to do that, and so we've done a lot of sort of what we would say is red flag analysis on the basis that prevention is better than the cure, as it were. So a lot of surgeries. I think on top of that, we have been, I think Mark alluded to this, involved in deeper discussions with construction clients in relation to their financial arrangements and helping them to look at measures to improve cash flow. And I think looking at potentially for some of them rescheduling a lot of their financial commitments, which are extremely stretched. And I think going forward, perhaps that support will be what we're sort of saying is kind of second wave advice. It's a bit glib, but essentially looking at arrangements, looking at negotiating changes to arrangements in light of what might happen next, looking at insurance arrangements and working capital. I mean, I think a lot of clients will be stretched going into the back end of this year and start of next. So looking to ensure they've preserved at least 3 months of cash. We've been working a lot with our restructuring colleagues in that regard. So I think, you know, there's a lot of things to be done and still more to be done.
And you mentioned there that obviously you experienced a lot of clients that have been stretched, and I presume that in terms of financially. So is that some of the common claims that you've heard of from clients? Is it all about sort of the cash flow? Is that sort of the main issue here?
If I can touch on that first, Ashley, and Sachin made a great point in terms of the construction sector wasn't impacted to like the aviation sector. But I think what that did bring is it brought huge challenges to the construction sector in terms of during the lockdowns, contractors were in some instances expected to continue working at site. However, contractors were facing the same challenges that they had either workers infected We've seen a number of instances, large projects in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, where there has been mass infection. And therefore, contractors really were faced with a dilemma in terms of the regulations permitted them to work. But the circumstances that they were faced with didn't allow them to continue at site. And that has led to a number of different types of claims that we're seeing, from suspension, extension of time, and cost claims. And I mean, Sachin and Mark are much better placed than me to talk to legal remedies and contractual strategies in relation to some of the claims. But really what we have seen is contractors were faced and continue to be faced with dilemma during lockdown and after lockdown, as restrictions and curfews continued. Really is a big cause of concern and problems for the construction sector.
Yeah. I saw you nodding your head there, Mark. Do you agree with those statements? And it'd be interesting to know what Hinson Mason's, what claims have kind of cropped up time and time again from you this year. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and this won't come as a great surprise to the rest of the panel, and certainly not to the people who have tuned in. I think we've all become experts as to the meaning, effect, and implications of force majeure clauses. Now, that will be a wry smile for a lot of people, because a clause that is relatively unsung in a EPC contract suddenly becomes front and central of everybody's thinking for 3 or 4 months is quite a novel development in the legal world, I have to say, particularly for a clause that is what we lawyers call boilerplate, i.e. it's the one that always goes in, it's always in the same form, it hasn't been updated for about 50 years, and everybody thinks they know what it means. Actually, surprising. Well, maybe not surprisingly, it's proved to be a real, really rich hunting ground for lawyers and claims consultants looking to find ways around some of the issues that Haroon just mentioned. But it all comes down to time and cost. Certainly, those projects that are ongoing, looking at claims around what can one do, particularly as a contractor, because you're piggy in the middle. An employer or an owner doesn't really have to say or do very much. The responsibility for construction work is yours as the contractor, and your supply chain are in the same position. They take their lead from you, and so you're very much at the front and central. Whatever you might do, what instructions you might do, whatever is said or done about how you comply with government directives, how you deal with COVID infections. Ultimately, it's a balancing act to make sure you don't do anything that's going to prejudice you up or down the line. So a lot of the claims and a lot of the advice that we're giving is centered around that. So looking at the force majeure claims, and traditionally they give you time but not cost. So the claims that we'll be looking at is, well, how do I get my costs? Because my costs actually are pretty significant when I've got labour buses that are only 2/3 full, when I've got lockdown on my various labour camps, and I have to bring in fresh labour from elsewhere. But over a 2, 3, 4 month period, that all starts mounting up, and of course there's project delays, etc., etc. So those are very much the sort of claims that we've been looking at. And the battleground, if I can put it that way, has been the particular meaning and effect of change of law clauses. The force majeure clause, time and money issues. Can I look elsewhere? Are there any special terms and conditions that I can rely upon? And being a little bit creative around that. And actually, to be honest with you, Ashley, that's still continuing, because we come out of the sort of more firm lockdown process, but of course we've still got, as we all know here in the UAE, particularly and elsewhere in the Middle East, infections flare up in various different parts of the country and different projects. And so you've had a ramping down of the projects as lockdown has been imposed, a ramping up as they've come out of that, and then maybe down again. And so it's a movable feast, but certainly I'd echo exactly what Haroon has said. It's around the impact on those ongoing projects.
And force majeure perfectly turns our next attention to this panel. So I want to go into, what are the best mechanisms to relieve contracts from legal disputes. Sachin, do you think force majeure is the answer to that?
Well, I just want to pick up on something Mark said, which I totally agree with before I fully answer that, Ashley, and that's to do with these boilerplate clauses. I think we are going to see, I don't know, an evolution or revolution, perhaps, in this area, almost like dispute clauses themselves, which for a long time were the things that were stuffed in at the end and no one really looked at with any great clarity. I think we are going to see now a whole tranche of the traditional boilerplates, those that Mark mentioned as being clauses stuck in at the end, also perhaps go through a more bespoke treatment, and actually see provisions that are more far-sighted, if I can put it that way, as to what may be coming down the road. And this, pandemic conditions could suddenly be a whole new area of drafting and contractual interpretation, because force majeure is and can be a relatively blunt instrument, and it can fall not just on the contract, but the legal framework, depending on which country you're operating. So I think a much more bespoke drafting is I think what we're going to see, trying to anticipate, and exactly what Mark said. You can force majeure may well be a provision looking at the failure to perform all your obligations, but what do you do now where you might be able to perform some but not all? There's a sort of a lockdown, then a release, then another lockdown. I mean, it won't cater and it won't do everything you need it to do. So I think in order to properly relieve the parties from disputes, there needs to be something that works much more much better for the circumstances we find ourselves. I think also, and it'd be interesting to see what Mark and Haroon think about this, which is, are we entering into, finally, particularly here in the Middle East, an era of collaboration between client, consultant, contractor, supply chain? Because I do think that whatever you say in the contract, unless you have got the wherewithal to collaborate and coordinate, where you look at yourselves as stakeholders, not adversarial parties, I don't think you'll ever relieve yourselves from dispute scenarios.
Haroon, do you think that Sachin's statement there is correct? Do you think we are entering into a new era of collaboration?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to say so, but early experience shows me that certainly.
Well, Haroon, Haroon, I should say I didn't say we were. I was just posing the question.
So, what have we seen? We've really seen so far some really proactive measures in place, and contractors, employers, supply chain coming together to find solutions. And that's collaboration. That's what we want to see. But we've also seen the other side of the coin. We've seen employers saying to contractor, well, pandemic or no pandemic, please proceed and carry on and complete my project. And that is the reality of the situation. We're still seeing that in the Middle East. Is that going to continue? Well, it's difficult to say. You'd like to say no or think no, but I'm afraid my view at the moment is perhaps we're still a bit of time away from better collaboration. Improvement for sure, but a long way to go, I think, Sachin, from my perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, you'll see we all had a little bit of a laugh there. I guess when you say to a lawyer, everybody's going to start collaborating on a building contract, then we do have a little bit of a wry smile, I guess. I think what is probably more seriously, I think what is probably right, and what I've certainly seen and it's been reflected in the work that we've been doing over the last few months, is that where a project is required, where it's needed, where the stakeholders are keen to get the job done, so say you've got an asset which once completed is going to start generating revenue, maybe something more in the sort of, perhaps in the power or oil and gas field, then there is a real incentive for the parties to collaborate. There's been a real feeling, yes, we're all in this together. Yeah, okay, it's not entirely clear, who should, nobody can bear responsibility for this, but where the costs are going to lie here. But let's move forward because we all want to finish the job. And you can extrapolate that more generally over the last few years. It's not simply COVID-19 and oil prices which has been driving disputes and antagonism between stakeholders. It's the general economic environment. So where you have a project which may have been started in good faith and with a strong financial case, that's all been rather eroded, I have to say, and that's then reflected in the appetite that the various stakeholders have for resolving disputes and resolving issues. So I think that's so. My caveat would be, I think in a particular type of project where everybody wants to finish the job as quickly as possible, then yes, we do get more collaboration there. But where that incentive is removed, I'm afraid the answer is no. I think there's a much wider discussion that we could have, and it would probably take us the whole of the afternoon, as to how to encourage collaboration in the Middle East and in UAE projects, how one allocates risk in a contract, how one balances the financial interests, so that everybody's pulling in the same direction, because we don't have that. But as I said, that's probably the subject of a separate discussion.
Okay. I think collaboration is a key theme of day 2 of our Leaders UAE conference. We saw from the previous panel with Richard, Kez, and Catherine. But Haroon, I was quite interested by your thoughts just then, because obviously we ran a piece that HKA merged with Probin Myers earlier this year. So it'd be good just to get your reason. What were the reasons behind the merge, and is it because of the uncertainty that we face at the moment?
It wasn't really in relation to the uncertainty, Ashley. Probin Myers, great brand, very well recognized firm of technical, architectural, expert witness practice, and really the addition to our team, of the Probin Myers team, was simply a response to our client demands in relation to the multidisciplinary teams that are required to resolve and provide solutions to some of the complex projects we're working on. So giving clients the access to that one-stop shop of multidisciplinary experts, whether it be quantum, architectural, technical, delay, was really seen as adding value from our perspective, and hence it's great for us to have the Probin Myers team on board. Okay, and Sachin, it'd be good to get your views on this in terms of the merger between HK and Probin Myers. Is this something that's going to be more frequent, do you think, going forward? And is this something that Reed Smith has looked into?
Well, it might depend on how wealthy Haroon has become, I guess, if it's depending on how many others go down that route. Look, I think the industry across the board is ripe for consolidation in many instances, and we are seeing and we are advising on strategies whereby certain members of the supply chain are looking at acquisition targets, and there's a lot of good value out there in some senses. So I can't say that I know whether or not there's more of this to come, other than I suspect that there may well be. What we are seeing in professional services is probably more multidisciplinary cooperation. So a lot of project work being done where you've got the lawyers, the the financial consultants, the claims consultants, and any others, working much more together as a group. That we're definitely seeing. But yeah, I think in times of shock, there will inevitably be change, and I imagine this is a bit of a survival of the fittest out there.
Okay. And obviously, since the turn of the year, there's been the cliche phrase of the new normal that's been sort of thrown out quite a lot across the media and certain other outlets, etc. So, Mark, it'd be good to know, what do people regard as the new normal at Pinsent Masons, and what have you sort of said going forward? Are you seeing changes in behaviours, particularly within the supply chains towards the future? Are we seeing, again, more collaborations at all?
Well, I guess the sort of first point to make is that if we all knew what the new normal was, we'd all be incredibly rich. It's the $1 million question. What is the new normal going to be? Is it today? Is it the normal today, or is it tomorrow, next week, whatever? I think we kind of just looking at it from a very personal perspective, when you're trying to manage teams of lawyers based across the Middle East in different parts, it's actually made it a lot easier for me, because although they're not in the office, they're all at home. They're all, as we all are here today, on the webinar or Teams or Zoom or whatever it might be. So actually, from that perspective, it's been a lot easier to keep in touch. And yes, it's had its challenges, as Ashley, you're more than aware, with all the issues about trying to get technology right. But then, but when it does work, it works really well. So I think there is definitely going to be. It seems to me that there's going to be a definite change in both the physical built environment and perhaps culturally as well. And what I mean by that is, we're going to see, I suspect, when we're looking at the big projects, the big infrastructure, we're looking at flexibility. Are we going to be building as many tower blocks, offices, etc., etc., etc.? I mean, who knows? But I suspect that it's been a bit of a wake-up call, particularly for big developers, about where their future may lie. But in a traditionally labor-intensive industry such as the construction sector, I think which has always kind of it's prided itself on agility and innovation. Actually, we've never really been that good at it. We're quite traditional, and I think that the constraints that have been imposed by the pandemic lockdown, I think, is going to reflect itself in how construction businesses go about their work. We're not going to be able to get a load of designers in the same room again. Well, not in the near future anyway. Possibly, next year, who knows? But I think as everything, it will evolve. There will be ways, people will look at new ways of working, trying to get the dynamism and innovation you get from collaboration. You can't do it face to face. Let's find another way of doing it. So I think that there'll be a definite, a greater move towards, agility. I think, as I said, there's going to be changes in the physical built environment. And I also see cultural changes where we'll move away from massive offices, loads of people crammed in together, massive site offices, loads of people moved in together. And we're going to see something, it'll be a halfway house. But I actually think it's a really good opportunity. I think that there's some real opportunities to make better use of tech, be more efficient in the way we do work, and in the construction sector, just in the way we go about our construction operations.
I think technology, is the key word there. We have had to adapt. We have had to, like we're doing now, we're speaking remotely. Normally we'd have this discussion physically. Haroon, it'd be good to get your perspective on this. At HK, have you had to be flexible? Have you had to adapt? What was the challenge of it? Was it easy to do this?
It was incredibly difficult, and really credit goes to each and every member of the HKA team who stepped up and took responsibility. We have over 150 people in the region. Our offices remain closed in the region. I mean, I'm in here today on my own. and my colleagues remain working from home, delivering solutions to clients. Is that going to be the new norm going forward? I agree with Mark. We're going to move to some sort of hybrid approach. I think it's been great for people to learn a bit more about themselves, what works and what doesn't work. And it's been great for people to be innovative and find solutions. And there are lots of positives that have come out from COVID-19. And it's up to each and every one of us, each and every business, to take those positives, capture them, record them, and make sure we implement them. Because when, and hopefully soon, a vaccine is available and COVID-19 becomes a thing of the past, we have to remember what we've learned, and we have to be able to take the good things away from this.
And sticking on the topic of technology, the key thing that I've noticed coming out from all of this, particularly for construction law firms and dispute resolution practices, is that there's been sort of a rise in virtual hearings. So Sachin, what's been the approach for virtual hearings, and what opportunities do you think they present for the industry? Are you facing any issues with clients moving towards virtual hearings and tribunals? What's Reed Smith's approach to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually it is right that virtual technology in dispute resolution has expedited through this period, and we are now very routinely involved in that format. But you're seeing the same in the Dubai courts. You're seeing expert panels now have moved to virtual hearings themselves. Look, it's not without challenges, but I think with advanced planning, you can avoid significant disruption to your process by adopting virtual technology. I should say rather, well, there are some firms who will and have promoted the use of virtual technology, perhaps, but when it comes down to an actual real matter, are perhaps less inclined to adopt it if their client's position may well be we benefited from not doing so. So we are seeing some rather exotic reasons why one shouldn't adopt technology. I think, and I think it will have some interesting consequences. I think when parties are looking at, for example, choosing arbitrators, they may well now focus on, those arbitrators who are tech savvy, those that have previously deployed and displayed their adeptness at the use of technology. So you've got another angle to debate when choosing your arbitrator. So I think it's definitely the future. What I would say, and I'd be interested to see what Mark thinks here, there are still a number of us who may well contest whether it is the thing to replace in-person hearings. I mean, not being able to see how witnesses respond to questions, seeing the sweat pouring down the brow, the little side glances between the arbitrators. It's very hard to get that sort of real-time perspective. So I think it's here, and actually in many respects may well have saved international arbitration, which was in some form of disrepute due to its long process and expensive process. But I think some of that can now be alleviated using technology. But whether it replaces, whether the end in-person hearing, effectively the trial at the end of the process disappears, I personally would hope not. But it'd be interesting to see what Mark thinks.
Thanks. Yes, Ash. I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said there, and I've had the privilege to sit not just as an arbitrator, but also being an advocate. And when you do cross-examine witnesses, you're absolutely right. You want to see the whites of their eyes. You want to see whether you're hitting the right targets and whether they're struggling with the answers. And then you want to see what the tribunal is thinking and whether they're following the nature of the arguments. And with the best will in the world, that's extremely difficult on a virtual hearing basis. Now, So I absolutely take that point, but I also think that actually things have moved on now sufficiently to make that as probably a moot point, because I think clients, arbitral institutions and lawyers now see that actually the benefits of virtual hearings are very manifest. I mean, there's the obvious one I think you mentioned about time and cost. So you don't have 3-member tribunal flying into Dubai from Australia, London, and Singapore, and staying at a 5-star hotel, and all the witnesses and all the experts, etc., etc. So a massive, saving in terms of cost and time. So I think it's going to be really difficult to persuade clients that moving back to the good old bad old days is a good thing. So I do take that point. I think though it's still evolving, because as we all know, regardless of time and costs, etc., the key thing is that justice must be done and must be seen to be done. And there are some, as I said, with my arbitrator's hat, there are concerns about equality of arms and fairness where there is a virtual hearing going on. The very obvious one is if one party has got the technology and the stable internet connection, all the other things, which allows them to properly present their case and understand what the arguments are from the other side. And we know, that somebody sitting in France, somebody sitting in Australia, somebody sitting in Louisiana, and somebody sitting, elsewhere, there will be very different, there will be very different experiences. A tribunal is going to be very, very concerned to avoid any suggestion that there's procedural unfairness, which means that any awards or judgments aren't going to be upheld. And so that is a pretty fundamental point that everybody, is going to be keen to make sure they've dealt with. And so there will still be a tendency, the defensive play is to have face-to-face hearings. And of course, as I've said, there'll be a lot of people saying, well, actually, that's also for an advocate and for, and even for the parties, seeing how people react in person in the witness box still remains, the test of whether justice is being seen to be done.
Okay, great insights there from Sachin and Mark. Thank you for that. We've got a couple of minutes left, and that draws us to our final question. So again, I want to get the thoughts from all three of you on this. We'll start with Haroon. What would be your key bit of advice for anyone tuning into this webinar who has sort of faced difficulties this year? What advice would you give to maintain a healthy business for them? Haroon, what do you think to that?
I will answer that question from the perspective of a contractor, let's say, who still has to deliver a project over the next 6 months to 12 months in very challenging circumstances. And the key bit of advice I would say, and I say it time and time again, give really careful consideration to the record keeping that's being kept on site. Really think carefully what kind of records need to be kept on site. We spoke to a client recently with 1,000 labor coming to and from work every day and temperatures being taken on entry. That's a lot of time that's being lost, whether it's 5 seconds per person. That's a lot of time that's being lost on a daily basis. Keep a record of that. Keep a video recording of that. If labor has to take a break every half an hour, 40 minutes to go and wash their hands, if, as Mark said, if designers cannot get together and you have design teams working remotely, is that impacting the efficiency of your designers? Is that consequently leading to a lower productivity? So I would say from that perspective, in terms of maintaining a healthy business with an obligation that a contractor is still having to deliver, but with lower productivity, give careful consideration to record keeping and have a very clear record keeping strategy in place, so that if one needs to go to the lawyers to pursue financial recourse, the evidence exists to enable the claims consultants to prepare the claims.
Okay, and Sachin, same question to you. What's the bit of advice that you give to your clients to maintain a healthy business and to make sure that it doesn't come across challenges to obviously, yeah. What do you think to that?
Yeah, I'll just build on what Haroon said. I think a couple of points, one or two, I suppose, more practical ones. Just don't bury your head. I mean, there's going to be challenges now, and they are going to be severe and serious. And I think, rather than try and run away from them, I think, to confront them. And that means being, I think, more open and more willing to put together a professional advisory team of your lawyers, your bankers, your insurance advisors, and get them involved, because I think as a combination, many of those can help throw out some lifelines. And I think it's an important adjunct to any business right now. Get as many friends in the room. Technology, adoption of technology, and in the things that Haroon mentioned, of record keeping and the like, I think it's going to be absolutely essential. And just one plea, I think, in that regard, slightly away from your question, Ashley, is that I hope clients going forward will allow contractors in the supply chain enough profit motivation that they can invest in these things, because I think very skinny margins are just will not help this industry as it now moves forward in having to invest in things which are very sort of routine for the likes of the car industry and others. I think the construction industry needs to have an understanding that people need to make healthy margins, and they need to invest that in training and technology and the like. And the final thing, I suppose, is people. I think Haroon made a really important point, and congratulating his own team and his people and the way they've worked. And I think that is absolutely essential. Keep very close to your people, your staff. They are the ones that the sort of cold face of this. And I think those that have are going to treat their people well will end up, I think, keeping their business intact far longer and for far stronger than others.
Okay. And just to conclude the panel, Mark, what are some of the key things that you say to your clients at Pitts and Masons?
Yeah, no, well, again, I guess there's a common theme emerging here. I echo a lot of what Haroon and Sash has said. Looking at the practical advice, it is in these days, and I mean, keep going back to cash flow, and I don't make any bones about it. Is absolutely critical at the moment, and I say to the team that what clients really want is to understand, where they can reserve their money and how they can recover it if they need to, and particularly where they're owed money. Without putting too fine a point on it, your client wants to be at the top of the queue, wielding the biggest stick and shouting the loudest and getting the attention of the people who've got the money. So how do we get them into that position? Genuinely, that's what it boils down to at the moment. And so to do that, you need to have persuasive, well substantiated claims. So you record, you notify, you update and you review, make sure you got all your documents, all those nice things that Haroon has gone through. I think that's absolutely right. But coupled with that, actually looking at it as sort of more holistically, it's really important. They say that when everybody's losing their heads around you, a cool head is very, very important. Clarity of approach, understand what your options are, and then take your decisions based on your legal, contractual, commercial, whatever it might be, looking at your priorities, and make sure you take pragmatic and reasonable, realistic decisions. Now, whether that's in a claims situation or perhaps also, and I'll pick up what Sash said, because I agree absolutely what he said about looking after your people, but also look after your clients. They're struggling as well. And so, if I dare say it, empathy is really important. It's important in what we do in our personal and professional lives, but particularly so at the moment. Everybody's suffering. So, if you can come up with a way of approaching your clients and saying, look, we know there's a problem here, but we want to work with you to try and find a solution and look at a sort of a win-win. I mean, again, it's all very common sense, but that strikes a chord, it seems to me, and I think that's also pretty important. So that's the kind of advice that I'm giving clients at the moment.
Great way to end the panel there. And yeah, that concludes our Leaders UAE conference. Thank you very much, Sachin, Mark and Arun, for delivering such great insights again into how you can support your clients, obviously, during these difficult times. Construction Week really appreciates you taking your time out of your day to speak with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Ashley.
Pleasure. And thank you to everyone who has made this event possible. Our editorial team, our events team, our speakers, and not forgetting our sponsors who are Cundall, HKA, and Pitts & Masons, as well as our legal partner, Reed Smith. Also feel free to drop me a line to see what you think about our virtual UAE conference this year. Obviously, it's a bit different to what we've put forward in previous years, but I'd like to know your thoughts, feedback, and you can do that by emailing myself at ashley.williams@itp.com. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and hopefully we will see all each other in person soon. Thank you.